If this case was as impactful for you as it was for us, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so more stories like Martha's are never forgotten. When the car she was riding in crashed and erupted into flames on a secluded Scottish road in May of 1994, her husband, Malcolm Webster, walked away with barely a scratch. At the funeral, Claire's brother, Peter, clasped Malcolm's hand as the two of them wept. Peter truly believed they were grieving together. He'd lost his sister, and Malcolm had lost his wife, or so it appeared. But what Peter didn't know was that he was holding the hand of the man who had murdered his sister. Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959, in Wandsworth, London. His father, Alexander Webster, was a detective chief superintendent with the Metropolitan Police, in charge of the fraud squad. His mother, Odette Blewett, had once been a nurse. On the surface, they seemed like a respectable family, but from a young age, Malcolm displayed some disturbing behaviors. He would fake fainting spells just to get attention. He also started fires, earning him the nickname Pyro from those who knew him. As a teenager, he lied to people, claiming he had cancer. He was constantly making up illnesses to get sympathy and manipulate everyone around him. Malcolm dropped out of school at 15 with no credentials. He bounced from one job to another: nurse, garbage collector, driver, and office clerk. He had a favorite saying that might have revealed more than he meant to: why work hard when you can get someone else to do it for you? In 1989, at 30 years old, Malcolm landed a job at Tawam Hospital in Abu Dhabi, working in the pediatric ward. Within just 6 months, 3 children under the age of 6 died from cardiac failure while under his care. Cardiac failure is extremely rare in children that young. A former colleague, Beth Brown, would later report that supervisors had discovered Webster injecting himself with insulin. They came to believe that he had ended the children's lives using insulin injections. However, there wasn't enough evidence to launch a police investigation. It's been alleged that Malcolm's father pulled some strings to get his son out of the UAE before any charges could be filed. Ultimately, no action was ever taken. The theory that later emerged among some investigators was that Webster had used these children as guinea pigs, testing out doses for future crimes. Malcolm returned to the UK, and in 1991, while working at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, he met Claire Morris. Claire was a 32-year-old nurse from Old Meldrum in Aberdeenshire. Her brother Peter's first impression of Malcolm was that he seemed like a charming, roguish character, intelligent, pleasant, and caring. Claire was completely smitten with him, but her mother, Betty, had a bad feeling about him. She thought he was strange. There was just something about Malcolm Webster that didn't sit right with her. On September 3, 1993, Malcolm and Claire got married. Almost right away, Claire's health took a nosedive. She was constantly tired and couldn't concentrate. She became completely dependent on Malcolm for her day-to-day care and well-being. What Claire had no idea about was that her new husband was secretly drugging her with temazepam, a benzodiazepine sedative. In fact, just the day before she died, Claire confided in her friend Leslie Roberts, saying, "Something's not right with me. I'm tired and I can't concentrate." A few weeks prior to that, Malcolm returned to the UK, and in 1991, while working at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary, he met Claire Morris. She became completely dependent on Malcolm for her day-to-day care and well-being. What Claire had no idea about, he chose his location carefully: the Orkenhove to Tarves Road in Mill of Kinghudi, Borty, Aberdeenshire, a remote, quiet, and isolated stretch of road. Malcolm had staged what looked like a dry run. He had driven their car into a ditch, testing out how it would appear. Malcolm drugged Claire with enough temazepam to knock her out cold. He drove to this secluded spot, parked the car near a tree, and then set the vehicle ablaze. He repeated himself, twice, assuring the officer he was alone. Then, the car erupted in flames. Claire Morris was burned alive inside. Malcolm was rushed to the hospital. Doctors ran a full battery of tests. His pulse, his heart rate, and his blood pressure were all perfectly normal. Everything was textbook for someone who had allegedly just walked away from a horrifying crash. The hospital staff concluded he was completely unharmed, but Malcolm insisted he was injured. At Claire's funeral, he showed up wearing a neck brace and stood right next to Peter, Claire's brother. Tears were streaming down both men's faces. Peter held Malcolm's hand, later recalling, "He was actually squeezing my hand. Most people had their heads bowed, but when I glanced over at him, he was crying just as much as I was, and that convinced me that Up until that point, he was a grieving husband who had lost his wife in an accident. In reality, I was holding the hand of her killer. The police investigation, however, turned up some red flags. There were no skid marks anywhere at the scene. The vehicle had no signs of crash damage. It appeared the car had been moving very slowly. Derek McDonald, one of the firefighters who responded to the call, said, "We all thought something was fishy. There was no sign of impact on the vehicle. A car that stopped or parked just doesn't spontaneously burst into flames." Claire's friend, Leslie Roberts, also had her doubts. Right after the crash, she had gone to Malcolm and Claire's cottage to grab some of his things to bring to him at the hospital. There on the table, she spotted medication for epilepsy. But neither Claire nor Malcolm had epilepsy. Her suspicion grew. She knew something was deeply wrong. At the funeral, Malcolm put on a show of sobbing and grief. But Leslie couldn't shake the chilling feeling that he was somehow involved in Claire's death. Leslie took her fears to the police, but they were dismissed. Still, one officer decided to look into it on his own time. He shared the same concerns. Claire hadn't been able to get out. The car was moving slowly, and there was a complete lack of skid marks. Despite this, the death was officially ruled an accident. Malcolm Webster then collected over $200,000 from insurance policies. Within just 6 months, he had blown through all of it. He bought himself a Land Rover Discovery and a yacht, and lavished expensive gifts on other women he was chasing. It was the perfect murder. Or so it seemed. Then, in 1996, Malcolm met Felicity Drum, an oncology nurse from Auckland, New Zealand. Their paths crossed in Saudi Arabia, where they were both working abroad. She found him charming and attentive. They were married on April 26, 1997. They honeymooned at Cook's Beach on New Zealand's Coromandel Peninsula. On their very first night, Malcolm made Felicity a cup of tea. What happened next was terrifying. Felicity would later testify, "The next thing I knew, 36 hours had passed before I woke up again. I had no explanation for it," she said. With Malcolm, it's all about control. And that wasn't the only incident on their honeymoon. One morning, after Malcolm brought her breakfast, Felicity started experiencing double vision and felt incredibly sick. She then slept for a solid 18 hours. This pattern of drugging continued for their entire marriage, even all through Felicity's pregnancy. Her food often had a harsh, bitter taste. "I had no explanation for it," she said. With Malcolm, it's all about control. And that wasn't the only incident on their honeymoon. What happened next was terrifying. Felicity would later testify, "The next thing I knew, 36 hours had passed before I woke up again." Their son, Edward, was born in November of 1998. He suffered from a severe case of eczema that, mysteriously, cleared up just weeks after Malcolm was out of the picture. It's believed the baby was exposed to the drugs while still in the womb. During their marriage, there were also 3 separate house fires. The first was in September 1997, at their cottage in Line of Sken, Scotland. Then another in January 1999, at a property they were planning to buy in Bayswater, Auckland. A third fire broke out at Felicity's parents' home in Takapuna. Meanwhile, Malcolm had managed to get his name added to Felicity's bank account. Nearly all of the 140,000 New Zealand dollars she had saved, worth about $80,000 US, simply vanished. He claimed he had cancer and serious heart problems, all of which were lies. He had also taken out 9 separate life insurance policies on Felicity, totaling around $750,000, and the payment deadline on a house they were buying in Auckland was looming. That deadline was February 12, 1999. And Malcolm kept making excuses for why his money from Scotland hadn't arrived. On the morning the payment was due, they headed to the bank together, with Malcolm driving Felicity's Honda Accord. All of a sudden, he claimed something was wrong with the steering, and the car swerved across 2 lanes of the highway, speeding up to 60 miles per hour. As they careened toward a utility pole, Felicity grabbed the wheel and discovered it was working just fine. The car finally landed in a ditch, and Webster immediately jumped out to open the trunk, revealing newspapers and gasoline inside. He repeatedly screamed at Felicity to stay in the car, but she refused, got out, and called her lawyer for a ride to the bank. Malcolm then faked a heart attack, and while he was at the hospital, he completely drained their joint bank account. Just 1 week later, a second attempt on her life occurred when Malcolm and Felicity took a trip to a rural area north of Auckland. While driving, Felicity drank from a water bottle. The next thing she knew, she was waking up in the passenger seat, deep in a forest, and a ringing phone would end up saving her life. When Malcolm came back to the car, he was enraged, demanding, "What the hell are you doing awake?" Police would later discover gasoline, wood, and newspapers in the trunk of the car, and Felicity's father, Edward, uncovered the 9 forged insurance policies on his daughter's life. When Felicity confronted Malcolm about trying to kill her, his response was absolutely chilling. He told her, "You would have died happy." Felicity immediately went to the Takapuna police station to make a formal statement, where hair analysis confirmed she had been drugged for her entire pregnancy. Before charges could be filed, Malcolm fled New Zealand, taking over $390,000 of Felicity's money and leaving her with only $12 to her name. In July of 2004, New Zealand authorities issued arrest warrants for Malcolm Webster, 2 for arson, 1 for administering drugs, and 1 for disabling a victim. For years, New Zealand police pushed their Scottish counterparts to arrest him. At first, they had no luck. Malcolm Webster had already returned to Scotland in 2002 and started a new relationship with a woman named Christina Willis. He was constantly borrowing money from her that he never paid back. He burned a computer hard drive in her garden, and, of course, he told her he had cancer. He even convinced her to write a will in his favor and grant him power of attorney, though there's no evidence he actually tried to kill Christina. The speculation is that he had simply found a much wealthier target. In December of 2005, Malcolm met Simone Banagi, a 41-year-old NHS manager in Oban. Simone was independently wealthy. Her father was a retired surgeon who had set up a trust fund. She owned her own house, and she had $50,000 in stocks. He even convinced her to write a will in his favor and grant him power of attorney, though there's no evidence he actually tried to kill Christina. To make the lie more believable, he even shaved his head. It worked. Simone changed her will, leaving everything she had to Malcolm. They began planning a transatlantic sailing trip for their honeymoon, a route that would take them from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean on her yacht. Authorities would later come to believe that Malcolm was planning to stage a boating accident, intending to drown her. Then, Simone discovered the foil on her life jacket had been punctured, while everyone else's was perfectly fine. She later said, "I have pretty much no doubt that the boat was how he was going to do it." Then, in the spring of 2006, the Oban Angling Club reported that $4,000 had gone missing. Malcolm Webster had been serving as their treasurer, and the subsequent embezzlement investigation finally put him on the radar of a detective inspector. Then, in June of 2006, a development occurred that would change the entire course of the investigation. Felicity's sister, Jane Drum, happened to be a domestic violence expert. While attending a police conference in Britain, she spoke with officers about her utter shock. Upon learning, her sister had been in a car crash, a crash that seemed to be an eerie reflection of the one that had killed Malcolm Webster's first wife. 2 fiery car crashes, separated by 11,000 miles and 5 years. Yet they shared the same chilling pattern and the same man. Jane Drum went straight to a chief superintendent and demanded they take action. That single conversation was the turning point. By 2007, police were searching Simone Bernardi's home. Inside, they found a stolen laptop and an unregistered firearm. It was then that investigators discovered the planned transatlantic yacht honeymoon, and Detective Inspector Charles Henry grew deeply concerned. Webster is a potential serial killer, and this was the ideal scenario for him, Henry stated. Simone was in absolute danger. I was convinced she was going to be the next victim. The thought of them sailing out into international waters absolutely horrified us. In January of 2008, police issued what's known as an Osman warning to Simone Banagi. The official warning disclosed that Malcolm already had a wife and a son. When Simone confronted him with this information, she said he turned ghost white. He became very, very quiet. I wished I wasn't in the room. I had never seen him act like that before. Then, in March of 2008, the police officially announced they were reopening the investigation into Claire Morris's death, codenamed Operation Field. The major breakthrough came from a tiny fragment of Claire's liver tissue, which had been preserved in paraffin wax following her autopsy back in 1994. Scientists had to develop an innovative dewaxing technique, something that had never been required before, which allowed them to extract and test the 14-year-old tissue. The results were stunning. A 92.4% probability that the drug temazepam was present in Claire's liver. Claire had never been prescribed temazepam. Malcolm Webster, however, had access to the drug as a nurse at Aberdeen Royal Infirmary. This single piece of forensic evidence completely transformed the case. The investigation's complexity drew comparisons to the Lockerbie bombing. It spanned 5 years, involved interviews with more than 1,000 people, and collected over 1,200 pieces of evidence. Investigators executed 90 search warrants, and key witnesses were brought in from 6 different countries. Detective Chief Inspector Phil Chapman and 5 of his colleagues spent a full month in New Zealand. The FBI even assisted with interviewing expatriates. Ultimately, 11 witnesses traveled all the way from New Zealand to Scotland for the trial. The major breakthrough came from a tiny fragment of Claire's liver tissue, which had been preserved in paraffin wax following her autopsy back in 1994. It became the longest criminal trial for a single defendant in Scottish history. The prosecution alone took 50 days to present its case, while the defense admitted that Webster was a liar, a womanizer, a thief, and an all-around scoundrel, but they argued he was not a killer. Then, key witnesses began to take the stand, including Ian Hardy. It became the longest criminal trial for a single defendant in Scottish history. The prosecution alone took 50 days to present its case. While the defense admitted that Webster was a liar, Wade concluded it was a case of deliberate arson. Flissy then recounted the 36-hour sleep, the drugged food, and waking up in the forest to find Webster in a rage. Peter Morris took the stand, describing how he held Webster's hand at the funeral as they both cried. But in reality, he said, I was holding the hand of her murderer. On May 19, 2011, the jury went to deliberate. They returned in less than 4 hours. Their verdict: guilty of murdering Claire Morris, guilty of the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, guilty of fraud, theft, and arson, guilty of drugging, and guilty of attempted bigamy. As the verdicts were read, Webster showed little emotion. On July 5, 2011, Lord Bannatyne sentenced Malcolm Webster to life in prison, with a minimum of 30 years to be served, one of the longest sentences ever handed down in Scotland. This was a murder which can only be described as cold-blooded, brutal, and callous, the judge declared. The motive was the utterly base one of financial gain. You have shown absolutely no remorse. I have formed the clear view that you are a considerable danger to women. Outside the courthouse, Peter Morris addressed the media. For 17 long years, it was considered the perfect crime. He got away with murder by masterfully staging it to look like a tragic accident. Webster filed multiple appeals, but every single one was denied. By February of 2016, he had run out of all legal options. He is now serving his sentence at HMP Shotts in Lanarkshire. It's been reported he told fellow inmates he fully expects to die behind bars, yet he continues to insist he is innocent. He won't be eligible for parole until the year 2041, at which point he will be 82 years old. Meanwhile, Claire's family fought to have her headstone replaced, determined to erase any mention of her marriage to him. The local council eventually granted their request, and Webster was officially barred from ever being buried next to her. In a tragic update, Peter Morris passed away in December of 2019 at just 56 years old. He had campaigned relentlessly to get justice for his sister, a fight against a predator, Malcolm Webster, who hunted wealthy women for almost 3 decades, drugging them and setting fires. He staged car crashes, all in the pursuit of money. He was ultimately diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, while a police profiler simply labeled him a sociopath. Claire Morris was only 32 years old when her life was taken. She was a nurse, a daughter, and a sister who deserved so much more than the 8 short months of marriage she endured before the man she married ended her life for nothing more than money.